Hello everyone. I'm now going to walk you through part 2 of our diet analysis project, which on its own is worth 7.5% of your overall grade in this course. Just like with the previous section, this cover page gives you information about how the project will be assessed, how to save the documents, which documents you need to upload, so it really walks you through the information you need to know. For this section, you're answering a bunch of questions related to your current eating habits, and in particular, the 3 days that you tracked for part 1 of this project. So just answer each question. When you have yes or no, you can simply highlight if you want or type your answer there. And often we're going to also ask for an explanation, so be sure to include that as well. Sometimes the space that you have to write your answer may seem small, but it's a Word document and you can expand as much as you need to give a thorough answer. Here in this table, you are asked to reflect on your intake, but also just provide some stats that will help you to utilize the information. Some of this is going to be pretty straightforward, like your height and your current body weight. If you don't know your exact weight and would prefer to keep it that way, that's totally appropriate. Make your best estimate. You also want to identify the body weight used in your profile because it might be a little bit different. You're asked to assess your health risk related to abdominal obesity. So you're asked to calculate, or I should say measure, your waist circumference. And we have here the steps on how you can do that. And then you're going to address whether those measurements indicate an increased risk or not for health conditions associated with abdominal obesity. You can read these directions, so I'm just going to kind of skip down to some of the sections that can be confusing to people. Number 11 in this section asks you, if you continued for an entire year to consume the same number of calories each day that you answered in number 9, the 3-day average that you consumed on those days that you tracked, what would be your expected weight change? So use information from the textbook and the lectures to identify how calories translate into weight gain or weight loss, and use that to calculate specifically, if I consumed this many calories per day for an entire year, would my weight likely go up or down, and by how much? So the number of pounds will go in the box here, and then in this last column, you're going to either highlight pounds gained or pounds lost, according to whether you were consuming more calories than are recommended for you or fewer calories than what are recommended for you. Here in number 12, we want you to think about what that answer tells you. Does the comparison validate or call into question how well your 3-day record compares to your actual current typical intake? Consider whether or not you've had any recent weight changes and if they seem to be in line with your findings here that you would likely be gaining or losing weight. Many of these upcoming sections are going to relate directly to certain sections from your all daily reports that you generated in part 1 of the project. Section C, you can answer using the bar graph report. I've made a note here to use critical thinking when completing the table, and this explanation will probably make more sense when we look at the table. But for each, you're going to identify how much you consumed for calories or any of these nutrients listed below, and what the recommended intake level is. And then you are going to identify, based on the bar graph report, are you roughly within the recommended intake, which would be anywhere from 85 to 149% of the recommendations for that nutrient, or are you below or above? And again, use these guidelines to determine which. However, going back to the little hint we had up top, some of the nutrients are ones that we are typically recommended simply eat less than this, and it's standard. for everyone. Sodium is a big one where students sometimes miss this, because sodium, the recommendation for sodium is listed at 2,300, but that's for most people the upper limit. So if you are consuming 2,000 milligrams of sodium instead of 2,300, you are, or let's pick a lower number so we know the percentages are right. Let's say you're consuming 1,500 milligrams of sodium. You don't want to indicate that that's below your recommended intake, really, because the reality is it is within the recommendation, which is to consume less than 2,300 milligrams. Hopefully that makes sense, or it will as you start to learn more about the DRIs if you're reading this ahead of time. Same goes for this next table. We want you to identify which of the nutrients from the table we just looked at you are basically meeting your needs through your average intake, which nutrients you might be under consuming, or which nutrients you might be over consuming where you're exceeding your recommended intakes. But again, don't indicate that you're under consuming, for instance, sodium, because it's less than the 2,300. Remember, except in very, very rare cases, it is beneficial to limit your sodium. All right, if you take any supplements currently, please complete section D. It will hopefully help you evaluate where those supplements might be benefiting you and where they might not be necessary for you. And you're actually asked to reflect on that in the last part of that section. If you don't take supplements currently, just indicate that in number 1. Remember, once more, the purpose of this project is to help you identify how to best meet your own health needs and goals. So if you're taking supplements, I do hope you will complete it. And if you're not, it is fine to just simply answer no to that first question and then not fill out the rest of the section. Section E, you're going to use the MyPlate report that's labeled intake versus recommendations for food groups in order to identify the percentages that you are consuming in comparison to what's recommended for you for each of the primary food groups. Then you are going to use the calories and fat report to identify the percent of calories from macronutrients, and you'll be able to get this information straight from the report. As a follow-up there, you're also going to think about what non-animal sources of protein you have in your diet, but that's not listed somewhere on the report. You're going to have to think through it and identify it yourself. The next section asks you to look at the percent of your calories per eating occasion. How do your calories split up? Are you eating most of the calories only at one meal or at one meal and some snacks, etc.? So this walks you through how to calculate that. It's not something that is automatically found on the reports that you completed for section 1, but there is a way to go back into Nutrition Calc and generate additional reports quickly. You don't have to enter any more data, just run a different report based on one meal at a time, so you can find out your average calorie intake for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks. So those will be 4 separate reports, and then you can compare those, divide them by your total average daily calories consumed, and then multiply to get the percentage. And the directions here walk you through every step of that. The next question is related to family history as it relates to chronic disease. And so there's a separate document that you're asked to complete for that. There is both a PDF version if you want to handwrite it, or a Word version if you'd rather type it in. I will tell you it is not the most user-friendly format, and I apologize for that, but we're trying to keep the sections consistent. So you don't need to go back farther than your grandparents, but I hope that you will add sections if you need to, if you have additional siblings, etc., that you want to indicate on here. All right, once you have completed the family tree, the next part of this section H is to highlight any of these 5 particular conditions that showed up in your family history and discuss how nutrition can impact each of those that you highlighted, those that there is a family history of for you. Now, I want to make it very clear that if you have any reason to prefer not to complete the family health history tree, that is absolutely your decision, and there is no penalty for that. In that case, simply skip that separate document and you can earn the appropriate points by addressing how nutrition impacts each one of these 5 disease states listed here in the second part of Section H. Section I of the project asks you to consider your typical physical activity using this pyramid. And so you're just going to address whether you met the recommendations and what barriers or motivations are involved here that are allowing you to or preventing you or getting in the way of your meeting those recommendations. Finally, you are going to summarize your big picture takeaways from this section of the project. I really encourage you to be specific. Don't repeat information that you already noted, but really try to come up with, again, those aha or light bulb moments that really demonstrate that you are translating the information above to be meaningful to you. Perhaps you're really surprised by what percentage of your intake is coming from a certain meal or food group. Maybe you are shocked to find out how much or how little of a particular nutrient you're consuming. Whatever it might be, please be, again, specific and detailed as to why that was a lesson for you and what you might do about that as well. That's it for this section of the project. Certainly, please reach out to me if you have any questions.